Yes.
And we are thrilled to be joined by State Representative John McQueeney. He's here to talk about something that completely overwhelms me, that I'm completely ignorant about, but that is a very, very hot topic right now, Julie, and that is Senate Bill 2, I think it's called.
Yes.
Anyway, so we're going to bring in someone who actually knows what's going on, and that is John McQueeney. McQueeney. I shouldn't. Representative McQueeney. This is so official. What do I call you?
John. Call me John.
Okay.
No, you're good.
John, thank you so much for being with us to kind of shed some light on this thing.
Right.
Everybody's talking about it. I feel like with my, friends, moms, we're all talking about it, but we're all confused as to what the purpose of it is. Where it stands, how it will impact those in public education, those in private education. So if you can just explain the whole thing to me, that would be outstanding.
Perfect. How much time do we have? So Senate Bill 2 is the bill for school choice, education, savings accounts, whatever, it's been called a bunch of different things, but Senate Bill 2 was the first step in getting that legislation across the finish line. The House has not filed our legislation for it. The way the process works is a Senate bill goes, a House bill goes, and then it gets reconciled, which there won't be very many differences, but there may be some nuanced differences between both chambers. And then that bill goes to the governor to be signed. So Senate Bill 2, the Senate was very expeditious about getting it out and getting it voted on. And then we're going to do our process. Our committees were announced last week. Chairman Brad Buckley, who had the Public Education Committee last session, is the chair of that committee this session. And like I said, his legislation, he's the author of the bill for the House, and it will be out probably this week, is what we anticipate. So I think it's important, the Senate Bill 2 and public ed, Senate Bill 2, school choice, education savings accounts. When the House puts our legislation forth for it, we will also be putting forth a historic spend and a historic bill for public education as well. A lot of people from an education savings account, school choice, really the intention of the bill is to give families and parents the power to choose what's best for their family. So it opens the door, it gives the proverbial toolbox to all parents in order to choose the best option for their family.
So, to somebody that maybe hasn't heard about this bill, how do you explain what the bill is and what all it entails?
Okay, so the legislation gives parents the opportunity to tap into education savings accounts to help fund, pay for, offset the school of their choice. So, for example, if a child wanted to go to a private Catholic school, you could apply to be in the program, and if accepted into the program, you've got the ability to have some of those funds to help offset the cost of it. So as the Senate bill was laid out, I believe it's a universal program, meaning anybody can apply, but it's got the initial deal on the Senate side was 100,000 students and $1 billion. So it's at about $10,000 per student. And then it goes through a savings account, educational savings, similar to a health savings account.
Okay, so Simpleton over here would ask the question, why don't we just put all of this money into public education, which is available to all children?
So there are a lot of different circumstances in everybody's household that sometimes public education is not the best option for them. And we want to make sure that every child in Texas and every family in Texas has got the ability to choose what's right for them. Public schools have got a big lift, and like I said, we're going to have a massive over $90 billion spend on public education, which will be a historic spend there so that we can give teacher pay raises. There'll be investments with discipline so that we can make sure that the teachers have got what they need, the toolkits they need in public education. So there's discipline in the classroom. There's going to be a change to the grading system of public schools from this A through F system. There'll be investment in school safety. So public education is not being left behind at all. With this legislation, think about it. It's $1 billion for the education savings account situation, and we're spending probably north of $90 billion on public education. So
Does it come from that same fund that would be going to the public education? I think maybe that's a question that a lot of people don't know.
So the budget for the state for the biennium is going to be over $300 billion. So we're not cutting. This is going to be an increase in spending for public education, and this is another standalone program. So one thing that I think is very important for people to understand is that this is not a win-lose for public education. This is a win-win for Texas. It's a win with a historic investment in public education, and it's a win with giving parents and families a choice for their students, for their children when public education just doesn't make sense. The Senate bill had a prioritization for low income and for students with disabilities. I think you'll see something similar to that coming out of the House bill as well.
Okay, and that was another question. So I have a very dear friend who has a daughter with Down syndrome, just started making her way into the public education system this year, as a matter of fact, at Overton Park Elementary, where you live about a mile from. So my question to you, I feel like there's a lot of fear on their end of how this is going to impact their child and how it's going to impact other children with disabilities.
Yeah. Well, so the legislation is going to prioritize children with disabilities. So they will have an opportunity to get into this program kind of with a little bit of a head start getting into it versus a student that just wants to go to a private school. But I think it's also really important to say, and so that everybody understands, it's a completely optional program. It is a family optional situation. You're not going to be forced to go apply to be in this program. It's something, if you want the resource, that the resource is available to you. But like I said earlier, the public education spend that it will be historic for an investment in public education as well. So this is, like I said, this is a win-win situation for Texas families. It's a win for Texas education. It's a win for Texas students. We're not stripping anything out of public ed in order to fund this program. We're fortunate that we've got the ability to fund both with our, we've got an actual surplus coming into this session, which is nice.
And just kind of to Emily's point, and I think the 504 programs at a lot of these schools are something that keeps resurfacing in a lot of these conversations and debates that you're seeing on social media or whatever it is. And the 504 programs we have right now are amazing. They're great, and they do such wonderful things for so many kids. I'm about to have a child enter one of them. Right. And so, reading about all this, obviously different parents have these things hit home for different reasons.
For sure.
And people that are writing these bills, voting on these bills. A lot of us are parents, right? So I guess what you're trying to say is that this isn't necessarily going to pull from current 504 situation or
Correct.
Disability funding, that kind of thing, just because you're creating this voucher system for the private schools. Is that correct? And is that something that you really want to enforce?
Correct. You're absolutely correct. This is a additional program offered for those that want to participate in it. A lot of the phone calls we get and messaging we get back on Senate Bill 2 has a lot to do with homeschool parents. I don't know if you guys are seeing that on social media or whatnot, but this is from a homeschool perspective. The legislation will give homeschool families and homeschool parents resources only if they want them. It is not going to change their ability to educate their kids as they see fit. But if there are resources that they can pull down, this is an option for them. But like I said, it is completely optional. It is not going to take from the public ed funding. We will have a historic public ed investment with legislation this session.
Okay, another simpleton question for me, and dumbing it way down. My initial thought was, listen, my kids are going to public school. I'm not trying to fund John McQueeney. I'm not trying to fund your kids going to private school. If that's a choice that you make, that's a choice that you make. I'm on the public school train, and so I don't really want my taxpayer dollars going to help fund John McQueeney's kids going to private school.
Yeah. The tax dollars that are here for this are every taxpayer's dollars. It's not just your dollars, my dollars, anybody else's dollars. I don't even think that, I'm not sure if this is going to remain in the legislation, but I would certainly support it remaining in the legislation, that I can't participate in this program. I will not apply for this. I will not be applying for this for my kids. I mean, as somebody that's part of the legislative process, I just don't think it's right.
Yeah. Okay. And so then and I guess this is probably yet to be determined. So who's making up this oversight committee? Who's making sure that elected officials aren't taking advantage of this, that people who are making, there's got to be parameters on the income level threshold that you have to be under or something. And where does that come from, and how does it get
So
it seems overwhelming, right? Like just so many things now to do. And I guess my initial thought would be like, surely these people, these elected officials aren't doing this without having thought all of this out and knowing the criticism and I guess the optics of it. And I think that's what it is the optics of it, because you just see it on its surface and you're like, BS. Like, I think this is terrible. But having talked to you now for 10 minutes, I have a better understanding of it, that it's not just what's out there. I'm not saying I'm in support of it or, against it, but I'm kind of getting a better idea now. But it does seem like now this is going to be the first domino, and then there's going to have to be so many things and checks and balances put in place to be sure that it really is impacting those that you talk about.
Yeah. And the Senate Bill 2 outlines a lot of those parameters, the groups that are created in order to make sure that the oversight of this program is done properly. I'll tell you, there are great organizations that care so much about the proper implementation of this bill, because I can talk about this all day long. I can tell you how it's intended to work. And if it doesn't work that way, we've got problems, so there will be oversight. The comptroller's office is probably the group that's going to manage the education savings account from the financial perspective of it. But there will be government oversight and agency oversight in making sure that this is done as intended. So.
And one more from me too. Well, I probably have a couple, but on the so how do the checks and balances work? Will it be solely up to the individual private school on whether or not they accept a child who wants to be in that school? How does that work on their side?
There's going to be a process for the private schools to be quote unquote accredited in the program. You can't just go create the mom game podcast school and
God, we would kill it. We would. There would be so many
kids' hearts.
There would be so many moms wanting to send their kids to our school.
I see the wine bottles in the background. So that's exactly where everybody wants.
Yeah, you have to be 21 to go to our school.
21 years old, and we're good, and we're getting back.
Yeah,
there will be oversight to make sure that there's not abuse. I think it's vitally important. I think everybody down here in Austin understands that it's important that we get this done right, and that's where the devil's in the details. I think that this momentum for this is building, across the country, to be honest. You're hearing about it from it out of the White House. You're hearing from it in Austin. You're hearing from it all over. So the momentum's there, but we really have got to make sure we get it done properly and done right. Devil's in the details. You've got my commitment. I know that the Pub Ed committee, the chair of that committee, they are very, very committed to making sure that this is done properly.
Interesting. So, is there anything, I guess, that, you have the platform, we have a lot of moms that listen, we have teachers that listen, we have administrators that listen, and that we know personally. So if you could sit down and have a cup of coffee, say with all these moms, teachers, administrators right now, who are stressed, who are planning to maybe, I saw some even teachers saying they're going to go to the Capitol or they're going to go to Austin and try to get their voice heard, whatever it is. There's people that are panicking because maybe they haven't seen this interview yet and haven't heard all of the details. So if you were just sitting down kind of, one-on-one with somebody who's really concerned about their kid and about the public school funding, what would you want to say to them? I
think that the first thing that we would say is that the intention of this legislation is to give you a choice if you want a choice. Okay. And I would say that we are going to make a historic investment in public education. This is not a win-lose. It is a win-win situation where we've got to make it work for public education. So, from a teacher's perspective, I understand it. Look, I've got a lot of faith in our public school teachers. I've got a lot of faith in teachers in general. And I just think that there's an element of families are going to choose what's right for them. And I think for the majority of Texas families, public education is going to be that. It's vitally important that we've got a good public education system. Most Americans, the biggest investment that they make in their life is buying their home. If we don't have good public education, good public schools in your neighborhood, it negatively impacts that investment. So we've got to make sure that we're protecting that investment. And from that perspective, I'm a business guy. It's important to me that we're making the right investments for investments to grow. So we've got to protect families in that regard. We cannot get and attract businesses to continue to come to Texas as a state if we don't have good public education. We've got to make sure so the lesson and the thing I would say having coffee is this is not a give up on public education. This is an alternate program that offers more choice for you. So.
And I was surprised, and this could be completely false. I heard on the radio today, a sports radio station. So who knows if it's true or not?
You're in your sports bubble, right?
Yes, yes. It's so nice here most of the time, John, in this little sports bubble. that there's like 32 states already have a voucher program, some sort of voucher program in place. And I think that's another thing for those of us who are a little more advanced in age, that don't really like change a whole lot. And that to me surprised me that, there are so many other states that already do. I'm not saying the exact same thing, but something similar. And do you think a lot of the resistance is from people like me who, A, don't know the details, as you said, and also, two, that are just like, don't jack with my public schools or whatever.
No.
Yeah.
And we're not here to jack with public schools. No, I think it's important for people to understand this is not a new concept that Texas is creating. This is pretty widespread in the United States. And we are going to make sure you've got my commitment and the people I work with down here that we're going to get in the weeds and make sure that this is done properly. So one other thing I would say that is important for, your listeners to understand is what you hear on social media is not always the absolute truth. And so there's a lot of this stuff, especially when controversial legislation is happening, that you go and hear one perspective of it and don't get the entire full story. One thing I encourage everybody to do when I meet with them is, listen, if something doesn't sound right, raise your hand. There are unintended consequences of legislation. And if there's an unintended consequence that somebody's like, man, I saw that coming and I didn't say anything about it, there's nothing we can do about it. Our intention with this legislation is to give families a choice in Texas. It is not intended to hurt public education. And that's where we're going to be in the details and making sure that we're doing the right thing for public education as well.
Okay, one more from me, and this again, I don't consider myself a donkey or an elephant, either one, I'm pretty neutral. I go back and forth on particular issues and all that kind of stuff. Is this considered a Republican-driven concept, and if so, where do the Democrats fall in this?
Yes, it is a Republican-driven concept for sure. The Democrats are in belief that we are going to strip funding away from public schools. And as I've told you guys all morning, we are not going to do that. We are going to have a historic investment in public education alongside this voucher program. Okay.
Anything else?
I think my last one would just be, I guess, kind of how, if you were in the position that you and Governor Abbott and anybody who is a state official is in,
right?
Where did the push for this come from? When you're looking at the whole state and all of the different things that you can do, need to do, want to do, there's a lot. Yep. Where did the push for this and making it a priority come from?
Yeah, I think that the loudest voice is the voice of the voters. Clearly, in the last election cycle, this was one of the top of mind issues. And with the governor's support, people that ran with this as part of what they believed in and giving families freedom and choice with their education were the individuals that were elected. So it really starts with the voters. All issues really start with the voters and, our constituents back at home, regardless of party. It matters that we get education right. And, I'm a firm believer that giving families and parents and, children the choice to choose what's best for them. You guys know a lot better. You know a whole lot better what's best for your family, more so than I do, or more so than the government does. So I think it's really important to give families the choice to choose what's best for them. And that's where the intention of this program is. And that's what we're going to get across the finish line.
Okay. Representative John McQueeney, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. This might be the most.
This is my first podcast. First podcast as an elected official.
It's our first elected official.
You're only going up from here. I promise. It's only going to get better.
Big day for us here. I wore a blazer for you.
She did. Julie wore a blazer for you. Well, we appreciate the time and the insight, and I hope you didn't get beaten down with my simpleton questions. But
hey, and listen, anytime I can come on and simplify something that doesn't make sense, or that that your listeners have got an interest in, I'm more than willing to do it.
So, well, I appreciate the time, and I know you probably don't listen to the Mom Game a lot, but we end every episode. And this is going to be so great because you are so official with your flags and stuff behind you. But I'm going to ask you to throw up 2 peace signs, look into the camera, and on the count of 3, say "Mom Game out." 1, 2, 3. Mom Game out.
He did it. He nailed it.
Nailed it.